he slept up on the roof.
Yeah.
And there was a new boy, I don't know who it was, but he was very enthusiastic, and he was standing by Prabhupada's bed while Prabhupada was taking rest. And Prabhupada said, no, that's not necessary. But so then he still remained there. He was really enthusiastic to guard Prabhupada while he was resting or something. And then Prabhupada called me, he said, tell him he doesn't have to stay there. I felt that was, for me, it was like Prabhupada had confidence in me too, not to be fanatical. I thought that was appreciated. He was appreciating that. I was so good. Of course, I wasn't so close as Bhakti Truly Kamal Krishna Maharaj, but Prabhupada knew me, so that was nice.
Prabhupada knew very well. Prabhupada has such affection for Trivikram Maharaj.
Also, chastisement. Then came to Vrindavan. I was there for some time. That was still like May, June, right? It was summer. And, July, August probably.
August probably.
Yeah. So I remember meeting him again in Bombay just when his quarters were finished. So that must have been when he came back.
That was before. He went to Rishikesh.
Yeah, so August or something.
Mm-hmm.
So then his quarters were there, and I came in for the first time. Prabhupada was alone. And I paid my obeisances, and I got up and I looked and I said, Vaikuntha, kind of softly, because it looked so beautiful there. Prabhupada said. And Prabhupada said, what was that? He kind of heard me, but he wanted me to say it again. I said, Vaikuntha. And then he just kind of smiled and leaned back. So it's true, wherever Prabhupada was, that place was Vaikuntha. Then he went to London, and I was in China, and then we got word that Prabhupada was back. And we came, and then I hadn't seen Prabhupada in a few months, right? And I was shocked. I was really shocked that Prabhupada had lost so much weight. He was just like you said. And I was on the bodily platform, and it affected me, I was trying to assimilate it, but it was hard for me to imagine that this was the same Prabhupada. Somehow I was. And I was in the room, and so Tamal Krishna Maharaj said, Srila Prabhupada Swami is here, would you like him to sing? So I was obliged to sing, but I was nervous, or I was out of it, and I couldn't sing properly. And Prabhupada immediately noticed it. He immediately could detect that I was in Maya because I was too much affected by his condition, and I was on the bodily path. And so he was not happy with my singing. He let somebody else sing. And then we stayed there, right, for the next few months. We were there in Vrindavan in those last. And we would come every day, like Bhakti Shumara said. We had very small cartels, little tiny cartels we were singing. I was there, I remember, I don't know if it was the last time Bhagavan saw Srila Prabhupada. When was the last time you saw Srila Prabhupada? I remember when you were going back to the west at one point. I was there. You came in and you were saying you were going back and something.
Narayan Maharaj had come. One of the group had come. Some of his godbrothers had come.
You weren't there at the time that he left. No, you weren't there. Yeah. I remember when you were getting permission from Prabhupada to go back to the west. I was in the room at the time. To be honest, Prabhupada wasn't so happy that you were leaving. It was like they were going back, but kind of Prabhupada wanted everybody to stay. So I saw that. I was just sitting in the room and I could see Prabhupada was giving his blessing, but at the same time he was feeling, why are they leaving? He wanted everybody to be there with him. Well, we were, thinking we had so much important work to do, so we were going. Anyway, then he chastised me again near the end, within 1 week before Prabhupada left. We centered around this Kaviraj coming from Calcutta. I had come early and Prabhupada was resting. I went into Tamal Krishna's little room, adjacent room. We were talking something, and then Prabhupada rang the bell. So Tamal Maharaj, Krishna Maharaj, went in to see Prabhupada. And then they were talking about this doctor was coming, and then after talking for some time, then I said something which I shouldn't have said, and Prabhupada chided me, and I remember feeling very broken-hearted that I didn't please him some way. But then after that, I remember we were singing the Shinga Arti once, and then I said, "Oh, you were singing very nicely." So he was very conscious. He was very alert what was going on, and even if he couldn't see very well, he could hear, and he was inspiring us and chastising us, and up to the last day practically. Like when you went and he turned to Kaviraj Maharaj and said, "See how much they love me." When you came down and said, "Prabhupada, we don't want you to go on you and Tamal Krishna Maharaj and Bhavananda, we don't want you to go on the bullocks." So he said, "That is my duty, to make you love me." So even up to the last, 1-2 days before Prabhupada left, he was very conscious, and we felt it. You had to be very careful what you said, especially in those days. I mean, sometimes he said, "I'm 80% liberal," but in those last days, it was like 50-50. He was ready to correct us very readily. Srila Prabhupada ki
Jai. His Holiness Trivikram Swami Maharaj ki Jai. During the early days, the devotees who played a very, very important role in establishing ISKCON all over the world. One of the leading devotees was Bhagavan Prabhu. He was an illustrious leader of ISKCON, and he received a lot of mercy, a lot of affection from Srila Prabhupada. He was very close to Srila Prabhupada, and we are very fortunate to have Bhagavan Prabhu with us tonight. So now we will request Bhagavan Prabhu to...
I'd like to also add one appreciation of Bhagavan Prabhu. It must have been 1976, Prabhupada came to London, and then he was planning to go to India, I think it was next. Originally the plan was to come to Europe, but then he wasn't feeling so well, he wanted to go back to India. And so it was kind of like arranged that he was going to go to India. But then Bhagavan was in France and he heard about that and he came over. And by his loving dealings with Prabhupada, he changed Prabhupada's mind. I mean, it was like, he was like empowered to convince Prabhupada to come to Paris or to come to the farm. He came to New Life. I was amazed that, I know about it because I read it in the conversation book. But if you read that section, you see that Prabhupada was controlled by love, and Bhagavan brought him to Paris.
And Prabhupada also was so proud of him because of his illustrious achievements.
We had the first temple with an elevator. You like that?
What year was that, 76, when you brought him to?
Well, in discussing different aspects of Prabhupada's disappearance, which when we speak of a extremely spiritual individual like Prabhupada was, I think we need to understand that he can appear and disappear all throughout your life. There's not just one appearance and one disappearance. He can disappear and then appear and then disappear and appear. Same way Krishna, due to whatever one is going through, can appear and disappear and appear and disappear. There's a movie out now called 30 Days of Night about a city in Alaska where it's night for 30 days and then sometimes it's day for 30 days. So it depends how you have the power to hold that appearance. And being in the material world, sometimes we need to experience day and sometimes we need to experience night. The night is when we're still aware, but where things look different in the night. And night is important too. Rasa dances at night. And on the light side of night and on the dark side of night, there are all the elements within the jiva that represent our resistance to God. And this constant birth and death, or the appearance and disappearance of Krishna or the spiritual master throughout our life, comes in ways where when the light is there, it enables you to go deeper into the darkness. And that darkness is, why is it that I feel no love for God, for the creation, for my brothers and sisters, for the plants, for the animals, for whatever. And then, because we've been in the light, when we go into the darkness, we're able to understand more our resistance, our maya, our fears, our even anger, our hatred towards love. And just to think, because we have a guru, or because we chant Hare Krishna, or because we are initiated, or because we've been chanting for so long, that we don't have any more of those elements within us, is to stop the process of self-realization. And Guru Granga and I were sitting upstairs while Maharaj was resting today. And I happened to, my cell phone was broken, so I was trying to call my father. And I ended up calling my daughter. And she at that moment was calling me. She goes to university in California. So we were calling each other at the same time. And she called me because she had a dream the night before. Now she's never been raised in the movement, but she's very familiar with the devotees. She's grown up with devotees and where we live. She said, "Dad, I had a dream last night about Prabhupada."
Josh.
And of course she'd never met him, but she'd seen pictures. Now this was a very unusual dream. She dreamt that Prabhupada was standing near the ocean and watching the waves, and that there were some boys on a hill and they were throwing stones at him. And she said, "They're going to hurt him." And so she said that one of those is going to hit him if they're not. So she said, sure enough, one of the stones hit him in the head and he died. And then I sat there and he resurrected himself. So she didn't know that today was his disappearance day. She had no idea. But she had that dream. So she asked me what it meant. And I said, I have to think about that. So, of course, after a while sitting here in Kirtan, I got an understanding of what that means. And unfortunately in this world, no matter how much love there is resistance to it. And around the world today, people are throwing flowers. But those flowers are sometimes empowered with negativity. And amongst the group that is supposed to be family, there to this day is still harshness, where there's this group who believes this and there's that group who believes that, but each group thinks they're, of course, more elevated than any other religion, and this group thinks they're more elevated than this group of devotees. And I saw one publication one time in which, I forget the name of the publication, something about Prabhupada, and it described every leader in ISKCON, all the bad things about them. And I couldn't believe that this was in print. And I couldn't believe that people were offering this as flowers. And I thought to myself, how do these people believe that they know this person? How could they possibly believe that he would be happy with this? How? And then I heard that this one is taking this one to court. I think Guru Granga told me something that somebody's taking someone to court. And I know that again they're taking people to court over the issue of the books and so on and so forth. So how does love become so hard? And then I thought of this story that Prabhupada said, that a father had two sons. You know the story? And the sons were wanting to massage the father, and each one thought that he was massaging the best. He was empowered to be the best masseuse. And in the process of pushing each other's hands away, they pushed so hard that they beat the father, and the father passed away. And I see sometimes from the vantage point that I'm in, that I see this kind of thing. And then I ask myself, well, how does Prabhupada really appear? And of course nothing's by chance. I've been meaning to see Guru Granga for a long time. And it happened to appear that Maharaj was coming, and I hadn't seen him since 70, well, I saw you a little bit, and since Prabhupada's disappearance. And you hear all these stories about these conspiracies to cause Prabhupada's demise, and you wonder what kind of brains dream up these kind of things. But then, as we sat the other day and talked in the living room, the basis of the talk was what Prabhupada was really about. And then you understand that the teachings are the essence, and in the teachings there's life. And the idea is, as he said, that the test of the devotion is not in the artis, it's not in the waving of the chamaras, it's not in the bowing down and how much you can look like a stick when you hit the ground. It's none of that. It's in how you cooperate together in love and allow the energy to flow and not be attached to holding on to something that comes your way. You just keep passing it on and moving and, living your life and trying to make the world a better place, as he tried to do. He tried to make the world a better place. He tried to be everyone's friend, whether it was in chastisement or whether it was in sweetness or whether it was in adventure. He was our friend. And the Guru is your friend. And the disciple is the friend. And that's what it's supposed to be about. And so we can try to hope that amongst the family of people who identify themselves as Krishna Bhaktas, that there's kindness and friendship and giving and trusting and no mean-spiritedness to... You might preserve the memory, but that doesn't mean you preserve the life. When the spiritual master's body was lowered into the yoga pit, there's salt that's put around, which is meant to preserve. So in everyone's mind, there's a preservation of some sort of Prabhupada. There's a memory. But the memory is supposed to be impregnated with life. Not just a memory, not just Prabhupada's stories, but the memories are supposed to propel into always new life and always new visions and always new manifesting of the truth of what he has given. So on this appearance day, it's actually a special appearance day, it's 30 years. And some of us are together again that haven't been together in a long time. Maharaj was one of the first devotees that I was saying last night that I knew before in Buffalo. We knew each other before we were devotees, that he became a devotee and he was always bothering me to come to the Sunday feast. And I was always saying, "What? You look so strange." And but anyway, it happened, and I think the real thing is that the appearance and disappearance are like the head and tail of the same coin. That, like my daughter's dream, he disappeared, then he appeared right after, he stood up. And so our spiritual consciousness disappears. We come into very dense energy, and that dense energy causes us to feel an artificial separation. And then, like Brahma, we climb back through that stem to find our origin. And anything in this material world is simply a reflection back to us of why we have separated ourselves originally from Krishna. And especially the negative or the painful parts hold the biggest clues of what it is that made us leave and separate. So hopefully in this sometimes strange world that's called devotion, there can be examples of people doing what's loving, and doing what's courageous, and doing what's new, and doing what's supposed to be done in order to make this world a better place. And in closing, Prabhupada's coming here, his appearance in this world on the ship, and his disappearance in the world, it teaches one thing, important at least for me, that there's a difference between loneliness and being alone. Now, Prabhupada was alone on the boat. He had several heart attacks. He came to a country that he knew no one. He was on the street with very little money. He had to go from home to home to home. But he was never lonely. Although in one sense he was alone. So what Prabhupada taught us is that from the beginning to the end, we're never alone. We have our friend who is Radha Krishna. We have an origin, we have a divine mother and father. And from the time of his death, he was not alone. But he was not lonely, but he was alone with his source, with his God, with his protector, with his ultimate friend. And there may be times in this crazy world that we live in. We have families, we have children. What if something happens and we're separated from all that's familiar? Just like that, it can happen. Just like that. You have 9/11, you have wars going on, you have climate change. There can be a time when all of a sudden you're separated. And you may be separated for a long time from anything that's familiar with you, whether you're a child or whether you're an adult. And at that time, you have to see if there's an appearance or a disappearance that's going on with you. So I'll leave it at that. It's a thoughtful day today.
Thank you, Bhagavan Prabhu. Bhagavan Prabhu used to give such brilliant classes. I was just remembering while listening to him. There's such a penetrating perception of this material nature. Thank you so much, Bhagavan Prabhu. Gopala Prabhu.
Namo Vishmadaya Krishna Prasad Hare Shrimati Bhaktivedanta Swami Namaki Namaste Saraswati Devi Gauravana Pacharani Nivasesha Sunyavadi Pasnitani Sudarni. Unlike my Gaba this year, I didn't have such a direct relationship with Srila Prabhupada. I was more like an infantryman, you might say, in Prabhupada's movement. And I a lot of times felt very frustrated. I remember one specific time, I think it was 1973, I had to pick up Rupanuga at the airport in Atlanta. I was still a brahmachari at the time. And I specifically asked to pick him up at the airport because I wanted some private time with him. Because I was feeling frustrated being in Atlanta. I was from New York. I liked the New York Temple, Brooklyn Temple. And there was a small temple in Atlanta. Actually, the story how I got to Atlanta is an interesting story. It was like supposed to be for one night, and I ended up staying there 17 years. But that's one of those famous ISKCON stories. So, and I remember asking him, I said, I've been serving Prabhupada now in this movement for a few years, and I feel like I don't know him. I don't know who he is. And I knew that in India you could get some personal association with Prabhupada. So I was asking if it's all right if I go. I've helped out here in Atlanta, like you asked me to, and can I go? And he said, do you read Srila Prabhupada's books? I said, yes. He said, do you listen to his tapes? I said, yes. You read his letters? I said, yes. So then you know Srila Prabhupada. So in this way, my relationship with Prabhupada was more, and the emphasis was on Vani. although I did get some opportunity, to be at festivals with Prabhupada, on morning walks and like that. And I specifically was inspired by a few things that Bhagavan Prabhu just said, and also what Srila Karmar said, and from what Bhakti True Swami said the other night. So I'd like to just touch on a few of those points. And the thing just now about loneliness, what Bhagavan was saying at the end, in 1976, Balavanti became the GBC, and then I just kind of moved up the corporate ladder to temple president. And I felt like I had risen to my level of incompetence. And I didn't, I'd always, it would be all right if I was, helping out, but, now everything was on my shoulders. And the Atlanta temple was a pretty significant temple at the time. And so I was always in anxiety. I was really feeling alone. I felt like all the weight was on me. Why is everyone going to come to Mongol Arti? What if one morning I come down and everyone's gone? So I was really in a lot of anxiety about this. And so for about 3 months I was feeling alone. That was my inner monologue, so to speak. But I didn't tell anybody, I didn't discuss it with anyone. So then the opportunity came. Prabhupada was in Manhattan for the first Rath Yatra there. So I thought, this would be my chance. I'm going to go in and tell Prabhupada that, thanks, but I don't really think I'm qualified for this service. I'm feeling alone here. And so I'm just thinking, I'm alone. So I get up the nerve to walk into Prabhupada's room. I paid my obeisances. Now there was a conversation already going on, and I don't know exactly what was being discussed, but as soon as I finished paying my obeisances, Prabhupada looked over at me and he said, one thing is, even though I was in New York all alone, I never felt alone. I always knew that as long as I was following my spiritual master's instructions, my Guru Maharaj was in my heart. So that was, and so when I left that room, I figured, I guess I'm just stuck with being present. So I didn't really discuss the issue any further. Another point about the movement and cooperation, when Srila Prabhupada was in Atlanta, and the pastimes in Atlanta are pretty well documented. They were pretty, ecstatic pastimes. Srila Prabhupada did a Madanga class on his Vyasa sign. He did so many different things. He performed arti for Bhaktisiddhanta Prabhupada. There was a lot of very ecstatic pastimes. And, during those days, 1975, this was the first time that Srila Prabhupada met the entire Radha Damodar traveling Sankirtan party. And so we think, now there's so many issues, like different parties, as was just mentioned. But there was also issues when Prabhupada was here. It was more like Grahasta versus Brahmachari Grahasta, or Brahmachari Sannyas versus Grahasta, or what kind of service? Were you a temple devotee or were you a book distributor, a Sankirtan devotee? So during a Sunday feast, after Prabhupada had given this tremendous, beautiful lecture, and there was a very interesting discussion with these Christians and so on, this one brahmachari asked the question, Srila Prabhupada, what pleases you the most? And there was just this pregnant pause. Several.
He was a book distributor.
Yeah. And whatever. He was. Anyway, he was a book distributor. But so there was this pregnant pause. Everyone's just like, there it is. Everyone's looking around. And now Prabhupada's going to say. And Prabhupada just started chuckling, laughing. And he looked down at some of the other leaders there and he said, if you love Krishna, if you chant Hare Krishna, and then everyone was just ecstatic. They just went crazy. Yeah! The issue was solved. If you love Krishna, and if you chant Hare Krishna. And another significant point about that particular pastime in Atlanta, because Prabhupada was the famous talk when he first arrived, the arrival talk, when he got up on the Vyasa sign. This was in February of 1975. And he still had his coat on, that pink coat. And he saw Gornitai. And these were, but while he was saying, his voice was breaking up, was cracking. And he said, so these two Prabhus, Nittai Gaurachandra, who appeared in West Bengal, India 500 years ago, are now standing here on your altar. And you could see when Prabhupada, when his external movement was totally in harmony with his internal, his inner monologue was devotion. Mam Jyo Vyapi Charena Bhakti Yogena Sevati. Saguna Samai Kip Jaitam Brahma Bhuyaya Papate. I read one translation of the purport where Prabhupada translated this to say that when the senses are saturated with devotion, saturated means like, a glove jug, and how you lift it up and it drips with this nectar. Prabhupada's senses, his every limb was saturated with devotion. His movement, when he paid obeisances, it wasn't just some external movement, it was devotion. He was seeing Krishna. And the first time I actually saw Prabhupada was like, for me, was the first time I saw reality. Because I knew that this person knew who he was. Everything else around him seemed like different shades of illusion. This person knew who he was, he knew who God was, he knew what his relationship with God was, he knew who I was. I didn't even know who I was. I still don't. But because of Prabhupada's mercy, I'm hopefully going to find out. But so he said, you could see that he really knew that those Lord Chaitanya. He didn't see bell metal. He saw Lord Chaitanya and Lord Nityananda. So afterwards, and then he began to cry even more. He said, Lord Krishna came 5,000 years ago, and he demanded surrender. Sarvadama Prita Jamamikam Saranamaja. But Lord Chaitanya came 500 years ago, and he lifted his arms. He said, all he wants you to do is surrender. And everyone just went, And Prabhupada did not make a display of public ecstasies. He was, he didn't. It was always, you could see tears in his eyes, but he didn't make a public display of his ecstasy. So as soon as that happened, when he became uncontrollable, then, his tears flowing, actually they were just flying out. He got up off the Vyasana and went to his quarters. And so many other things happened there in Atlanta during those 3 days. But later on, I think it was Shirakirti Prabhu asked Prabhupada, he said, what was it about Atlanta that you, before this, I want to say one other thing. That it was in Vrindavan, 1975, at the opening of Krishna Balaram. And, that was that night, when the deities had been installed. Then Prabhupada was, all these dignitaries were there. And he started to mention the different assets of the movement. He mentioned that we have our Satguru who's got a library party and they're distributing so many standing orders. And then he mentioned that Artamal Krishna has so many buses and they're distributing so many books and collecting so many lakhs of rupees. And then he said, we have over 100 temples. And in those days, there was the London temple, there was Paris, there was Los Angeles, there was Chicago, New York. Atlanta was, but we had just moved into this fairly nice facility in a very nice neighborhood, which coincided actually with Bhakti Sri Damodar's coming there, going to Emory, and he lived about a mile away. I've always thought that was an interesting transcendental experience, coincidence. But he said, and so he said, we have over 100 temples, and I have just come from Atlanta. Now, I'm out in the courtyard there in the Krishna Balaram, and I got to find Balavanta or some Atlanta devotee, because he didn't say these other temples, he just said Atlanta. This was a little bit of spiritual pride. Okay? So he said, I have just come from Atlanta. And he said, they have 3 buildings there. One side for the women, one side for the men. In the center they have this, an altar, a temple for Gaurnitai. And he said, you should all go and see how they are dancing for Lord Chaitanya. You would be amazed. And because there was some kirtans there where no one's feet were touching the ground. So then Srila Prabhu had asked Prabhupada, what was it about your visit in Atlanta that made you so happy or so pleased with the devotees? And he said, when I saw how all the devotees were cooperating together just to please me, and because there was in those days big controversies between the traveling brahmachari and sannyasi parties in the temple, and there was a lot of controversy, farm devotees, temple devotees. He said, when I saw when all the devotees were working in a cooperative spirit just to please me, that's what pleased me. There were so many other things, so many other opulent buildings and opulent, but Prabhupada saw this particular devotion, this love, at this moment, for those 3 days. The devotees put aside all other interests to welcome Srila Prabhupada, because they knew, everybody knew that we weren't prepared. The Atlanta Temple, we'd only been there about a month and a half, and some of those buildings had been deserted. Homeless people were living in them. And so in a month or 2 weeks, we did this marathon. As a matter of fact, they were putting together the Vyasa sign while Prabhupada was still at the airport. We didn't know if it was going to hold. There's a lot of stories like this. But in any case, one other thing, just a few more minutes, if you just give me, I didn't mean to speak this much, but I've been inspired by my godbrothers. And that is that, that last year, I was in Mayapur, and I remember that Srila Prabhupada was fine in the beginning, and then he started to become ill, and he actually didn't come down for some classes a couple of days. Then I think he came down one time, and he sat on the Vyasa sign, and he had Brahmananda, I think, or Kirtananda, both of them speak a little like that. So that was the first indication, but we'd seen Prabhupada, throughout the 70s, there were times when we'd have to do 24-hour kirtans for Prabhupada's health. And then he would recover and go dance down in front of the Rath Yatra cart in London. He'd always rebound. There was no thought in my mind that Prabhupada, there would be a day when I was going to be, Prabhupada wasn't on the planet. And I always had this idea, and I don't know if someone had said it when I first joined, but in the back of my mind, I'd always heard this thing that Prabhupada was going to live to his 100. So the thought never entered my mind, even though, this is the philosophy. So later that year, when Prabhupada was in London, the reason he had to stay in London is because his green card had expired. He'd been out of the country more than 13 months. So, coincidentally, a lawyer that we had been working with in Atlanta had just been appointed by Jimmy Carter to be in charge of the naturalization and immigration department. And we had a very good relationship with us. He was very favorable to us. He helped us in a lot of important court cases. And I think his name was David Cross. I'm not sure, I can't remember. So Balamanta and I made an appointment to see him, but he was in he had an office still in Atlanta, but he was in DC. And so in any case, we get to talk to him about it, and we did this in a pretty expedient manner. And he said, sure, no problem. He immediately just overwrote all the other paperwork and said, yeah, no, we'll take care of this. And the day that he said that, Prabhupada's green card could be renewed, that was the day we got the call saying that Prabhupada was going back to India. So that was my first frustration, major frustration. I really felt like but I still didn't think that Prabhupada was leaving. But I really felt like because Prabhupada had said something around that time, if I remember correctly, that 50% of my movement is now established. And now I want to establish the second half, or the other 50%, by he was going to go to Gita Nagari and set up these farm communities, if I'm remembering correctly. So, and for years I've really tortured myself, beat myself up over that, thinking maybe I could have done it faster, and maybe Prabhupada would have come. But I didn't. I'm not the doer anyway, but So then later on, it got to the point like, and I don't remember what month that was, when Prabhupada was in London, but then we started getting these regular reports. I think it was Ramaswamy was sending us transcripts, and I would read them every morning, what was happening. And we'd heard these reports that Prabhupada wanted everyone to come. So I wanted to go. I really, all these years now, you know, serving, you know, the instruction, I wanted to. And
Why didn't you just go?
well, so what happened was, and I don't mean to be disparaging towards Prabhupada, but he was the GBC, so he set up a particular system where we would, and this all comes out, works out. I've resolved all of this. I don't have any bad feelings now, but anyway, maybe you can tell me if I did the right thing. I don't know. But he said, since, you know, it's getting close to the Christmas marathon, the most important thing, you know, that for Prabhupada, it made all good sense. That the thing that pleased Prabhupada the most was book distribution. The Atlanta Temple was one of the top 5 temples at that point. We had the Atlanta airport, and we were, you know, having regular competitions with Chicago and LA at Thanksgiving and Christmas, and generally we win. And so he said, you know, that will please Prabhupada the most. He'll be rejuvenated, and his health will be restored, and everything will be good. I still wasn't satisfied with that. So he said, well, we'll set up a rotating thing. And he said, so since the temple president of Mississippi isn't doing book distribution, he's got his business, he should go first. Well, he didn't want to go. He refused to go. That's sort of an interesting telling story. But the thing is, so I said, okay, I'm going. Yeah, let me go. And he said, no, you know, you won't, you know, they can go, or Houston can go, but you have to stay. Atlanta's the, you know, that's the main place for book distribution. And so, like you had said the other night, you said those 3 instructions that Prabhupada gave you, or gave us, about cooperation, and listening to the GBC, and never leave ISKCON. So, in those days, there was no question about not listening to your GBC. So I was really torn. I'm a temple president, my instructions are to stay, but I want to go, and it's spiritual sense gratification, Prabhupada. So I stayed, and I was miserable. I was so depressed. And my son had just been born a month before. I had every reason to be very, on all levels, very happy and hopeful. But but I was for a month, even while my son had been born, and we were doing well at the temple with book distribution, I was in a dark, talking about this 30 days of night, I was totally in darkness. My heart felt vacant all the time. And I was regularly at night thinking I'm going to get up and go, but I didn't. I was a good soldier. So then, the day that Prabhupada actually left, I was really feeling depressed. I didn't know why, and I was so depressed. I was back in my room, in my quarters, and Chardeshan, one of the leading book distributors, he called to me, and he was down at the bottom of the stairs. I was upstairs, and he said, he gave me the news, and I just collapsed. I'll be just a few seconds. So, so he told me, he said, he told me that Prabhupada had left, and I was just devastated. I felt like, I just couldn't believe it. I just could not accept that I wasn't going to see Prabhupada again. That I didn't have a chance to be there and see him or talk to him or just hear him. I just couldn't accept it. I felt cheated. And I didn't know what this meant. I had no idea what it meant. And once again now, somehow or other, somebody just told me, a couple of devotees recently told me, I don't even know how this happened, I don't remember, but some devotees told me that night, I gave this talk, and it helped appease everyone, and they were all very enlivened by the talk, but I don't remember it at all. All I remember is darkness. And I started to question authority, because this is the real issue in this material world. The reason why we are here is because we're envious of authority. We don't want authority. it manifests itself in various ways, but we are, and that is our disease. So, this was a good reason to be really mad at my authority now, you know. So then, what happened is that night, somewhere or other, I fell asleep. I was in so much anxiety, but I fell asleep. And that night, I had, I don't usually like to talk about, had a few opportunities to associate with Prabhupada dreams. And they're personal, and I don't like to put too much emphasis on it, but I do believe that, I know that that night I was in Vrindavan, in Prabhupada's room, and Prabhupada was sitting there. And I was in so much, I thought he was in pain. I just kept thinking he's in so much pain. But I could see he looked exactly the same, but he looked younger. And he was so clean that there was a kind of effulgence, but it wasn't like a bright light. It was just, he was so clean and pure. And I could see that he seemed very comfortable, which was surprising to me. And I said, "So Prabhupada, you're all right?" He said, "Yes, I'm all right." I said, "What about you?" And I said, "Well, I'm trying to manage the temple and this and that." He said, I started talking about some of the things we were doing at the temple, and he said, "Never mind about that." He said, "What, have you, because when he was in Atlanta, I had done this one play for Prabhupada. I had organized, written and directed and performed this play for Prabhupada about What's Your Tanya in the Casa. And I was always very shy around Prabhupada. When I had opportunities to talk to him, I would freeze, very shy. Spoke to him a few times, but so I couldn't believe I had put myself in this position where I was going to play God in front of Prabhupada. I was going to not play What's Your Tanya. So anyway, he said, in the dream, he said, "Never mind about that." He said, "Have you done any more of those plays like you did when I was there in Atlanta?" And I said, "Well, no, actually, I've been kind of busy doing this." He said, "I think you should do more of them. That will do good for you and for all who see on that same standard." This was the exact same instruction he had given me when he was in Atlanta. So, of course, I haven't really done it since he's left, but Prabhupada did come to me in that moment of despair when I was questioning authority. Prabhupada did come to me in the dream. He reappeared, as Bhagavan was just talking. He had disappeared. He appeared to me. He was in there. I was in the room with Srila Prabhupada. And I had a kind of association with him that I could never possibly have had otherwise. So I just like to thank my God brothers and all of these nice devotees, God brothers, God sisters, who are here tonight and observing Prabhupada's disappearance day and helping us to rekindle our devotion to Prabhupada. And hopefully we'll have a bright future together.
Srila Prabhupada ki.
Thank you, Ranjan Prabhu. Actually, when the devotees speak, then we can realize how much love they have. So, realization when you speak. I'm sorry that I haven't been formally introduced to you before. This is the first time I met you. And I'm sorry that I didn't even know that you are Gokul Ranjan Prabhu.
Actually, I don't know if you don't remember, but it turned out I was in Potomac Temple on Gaur Purnima when you were there. There was just a handful of devotees that morning for Mangal Artik, and then you gave a class. And I was there that day, and I didn't get a chance to actually introduce myself.
What year was that?
This is back, was it 2001 or 2002? It was the first time you said, it was the first time you hadn't spent Gaur Purnima in Mayapur. So I was there then, I was the only, but I've heard of your glories.
Jaya Prabhupada, Jaya Prabhupada, Jaya Prabhupada, Srila Prabhupada, Jaya Prabhupada, Jaya